So the topic of today's webinar is future-proof your business for growth. And part of the reason that we are here today is as of Monday, it's going to be Q4. And I'm sure that, like a lot of you, we are being asked in my team to start thinking about not only the end of the year, but what's going to happen in 2019. And what we're going to hopefully do today is provide you with some practical and tactical ways to start to answer some of the questions that maybe you're asking of your team, maybe your CEO or your board are asking of you. And we're going to talk about using data as a way to help to prevent it just from being a pie in the sky sort of finger in the wind process. This is not going to be just a gut check. We're going to talk about using data for setting benchmarks and actually be tactical about how we approach what we're going to do for the upcoming time. So pretty straightforward today for the agenda. We're going to do two main sections. First and foremost, we're going to talk a little bit about some KPIs and some specific metrics, just a high-level conversation that should be applicable to any staffing or recruiting business. So we're also going to talk a little bit about some practical steps that you can take here. And then one of the last things that we're going to do is talk about best practices that we have gathered from working with Bullhorn and other staffing companies for the past 7 years. You know, we've worked with literally hundreds of individuals that are in the staffing recruiting industry, and fortunately we've been able to distill this down in some great information that we will share at the end of today's call. So without any further ado, just a quick little background on who we are at InsightSquared. So we have been a Bullhorn marketplace partner since 2011. InsightSquared actually started with Bullhorn as the main partner. We have since then gathered our customer base to well over 1,000, and you'll see that those statistics that are listed there are specific to Bullhorn clients. So folks that utilize our tool have seen a 22% increase in monthly bookings, a 4% increase in time to fill, 30% increase in average deal value, and a 3% increase in overall win rate. That image that you see there is one of my favorite reports from our tool, and it's simply just a listing of individual contributors and how they are doing against their goals. And of course, you can see it's just dummy data, but that gives you a kind of idea of the visuals that we represent. A little bit about me. I've been with InsightSquared for 3.5 years now, and I started on the technical side of the house in the services team, doing everything from tier 1 to support to moving into product and implementation consultant, so working with brand new customers, getting them set up. And then in the past 2 years, I've done more of the business consultative side of the business, and currently I am in charge of all of our Bullhorn partners. So it just sort of made sense that I would be the one speaking today. All right. So now to the meat of it, determining KPIs. So first and foremost, what is a KPI? Of course, we all know that it's a key performance indicator, but one thing that we'd like to point out here is that if everything is a priority, nothing is. So it's a matter of not just looking at data critically to make sure that you're hitting the right points, but making sure that you're not treating each and every piece of data with the same weight. There's obviously things in your business that are going to have much more impact on the outcome of how you're going to perform this year. For example, the number of placements that you and your team are making are probably going to be more important and impactful than, say, the number of voicemails that you left this year. So again, the importance of making sure that we are focusing on the right numbers. So one of the questions that comes in there is how do you determine which metrics to consider? It should be team specific and sometimes even individual specific. So I have up there that recruiters and sales teams are not the same. I would not expect that you would have the same set of metrics for your recruiters that you would for your account executives, or you might even divide it further. You might have different variables or verticals, I should say, for one part of a team versus another. And I wouldn't expect that your most tenured employees would have the same goals and KPIs that a brand new hire would have. Another key point there is how do you leverage metrics and how often? Different metrics should be leveraged at different times. So typically, we would recommend looking at something like a trend on a monthly, quarterly, yearly basis versus how someone's progress to goal is happening. And that might be something that we would want to do on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. But I wouldn't expect that you're sitting down with your individual contributors on a daily basis looking at how their job orders created have been trending in the past 6 months. And that sort of doesn't make any sense. Also, I would expect that managers and executives would be more interested in examining things like trends, whereas individual contributors are more interested in how am I doing against my number? When I get to my job every day, I know that I have lots of emails and follow-ups with my contracts and things of that nature, but at the end of the day, I know exactly where I stand against my number, and the same is going to be true for your team. One of the things that's most important to establish here when we're talking about leveraging metrics is that you have to establish a cadence. So it's great that you might be reviewing these pieces of information, but if you don't have a cadence for sharing them out with the team and discussing them with the team, they all sort of lose their teeth as well. Okay. Now, when we're talking about getting the most out of the available resources, this is your CEO has set you up with a revenue goal of X amount of dollars in increase for the end of the year. Well, how are you going to achieve that? There's basically two ways that you can do that. You can get more out of your individual contributors, more out of your team. You can optimize there, or you don't have the ability to increase your headcount, and you have to really optimize the job orders and the client base that you're working with. So this is sort of two different school of thoughts of how you can help to optimize either one of those things. When we talk about getting the most out of your reps, we always think about what I call the trinity of metrics, and that is how someone is performing against their peers. So how do I stack and rank against those that are doing the same job that I am? Against yourself. So am I improving? Am I hitting my number this week as opposed to last week? Am I crushing it this month with the number of placements, whereas last month I didn't have such a great number? And then, of course, against the company standard. So that's against the goal that you as leaders within the team have set forth. Because it's quite possible that I'm doing a great job against my peers, and it's quite possible that I'm doing 2 times the number of submissions that I was last month. But at the end of the day, if that number is way off and inappropriate to help the company meet their goal, it doesn't matter. So it really is a matter of looking at all of those different metrics holistically. We also want to talk a little bit about leveraging the different metrics at the appropriate times. So I mentioned on the previous slide, I know exactly where I am against my number on the first of the month, the mid-month, and the last of the month. And that allows me to really plan out where do I need to apply the gas if I'm really behind in the first half of the month. I also know that I can start to crank it out towards the end. But just knowing exactly where that end goal is will allow me on a monthly or even daily basis to figure out how do I need to prioritize my work. Similarly, we wouldn't expect that we would be seeing trends on a daily basis. Again, we'd want to look at those on a longer context scale. Another way that we can get the most out of our team is to encourage competition. Easy ways to do that. A leaderboard. In our office, we also have gongs and we have bells, so we have the physical signs set up for anyone in the office to be able to see, so we don't hide our numbers at all. Other companies don't want to necessarily do the competition route, so they'll do the reward route. So maybe if you have a rep that's really crushing it this month, you give them a special incentive, or maybe even something as simple as just writing a really nice note that a client or that a candidate presented, just encouraging people to do the best in their job. We've found that different teams and different individual contributors will respond to different behaviors. So it's not always the carrot or the stick. Sometimes it's a combination thereof, or sometimes one team just needs one motivator versus another. When we're talking about getting the most out of your pipeline, what we're really talking about is, what does a winning deal look like? There's got to be a recipe in your business for what a successful placement looks like, and your team probably has executed on that numerous times. We like to think about, not all pipeline is created equal. There may be some job orders that will have a huge potential payoff, but you'll never land them because they're way outside of your comfort zone, or because that client just takes forever to make up their mind. Similarly, there might be certain verticals or certain industries that you work really well in, and that's where you should stick with your business. If you can look back at how you've performed to identify what those winning factors are, then you should apply those winning factors to your current pipeline and make sure that you're spending time with those jobs. Another thing that we want to make sure to look at is, whenever we're losing business, are we recording a reason? Just as important in knowing what a winning deal looks like, knowing what a losing deal looks like and why. Is it because of time? Is it because of competition? Is it because of a number of factors? Taking the time to record a lost reason on those job orders can be super valuable when looking back. And then, of course, there are the three basic ones that we look at: time to fill, basic win rate, and the ratios of conversion along the pipeline. That's where we can start to see, is there a major gap between something like your interview stage to your hire stage, or maybe from CLI-sub to interview? Is there a place in the process where you're dropping off? If you can fix and correct those small tweaks, you can have a huge impact on the end of the process. Okay, when we're talking about using metrics for onboarding and ramping, the reason that I chose that image there is it's a blueprint, and that's really what we would hope that you would use data for. Using the numbers that you have of how past reps have performed on their initial period to set a path forward for the new hires that you have. And the nice thing about using your own numbers is that it creates something more valuable than just a template. It also creates social proof. And by that, I mean, it's not just a pie in the sky number that you as a manager came up with, that at day 30, you should be performing at this level. At day 60, you should be performing at this level. I'm looking at my top reps that I have today in the office, and I'm looking back at their historical numbers. Where were they at month 1? Where were they at the end of the 60-day period? And that only makes sure that the goals that you're setting are attainable. It also means that they are justifiable and that they are going to be based on their peers' performance. Another thing that we want to do here is talk about something like coverage. So if you need to hire 3 more reps in the coming year, do you do it all at the same time, or do you have them staggered at different ramp periods? As day 1, I wouldn't expect that contributor is going to be doing full max. And do you have an appropriate amount of revenue to cover the cost of keeping that person on board while they are ramping, or does it make sense to stagger them out? And again, these are all things that you need to determine for your business. If you hire a bunch of reps at once, but they're not pulling in the numbers to be able to cover your overhead, it might be more appropriate to potentially stagger them out. Similarly, if we have a more seasoned veteran that's coming into the business, their ramp time would be, I would expect, shorter than somebody who's fresh and new to the business. Okay. So as we mentioned at the beginning of the call, when we're talking about some practical and tactical things that you can do, these are some of the best practices that we see that data-driven companies that we work with are engaging in today. So the number 1 and number 6 you'll see are very highly related. Implementing and enforcing a measurable set of KPIs, and then establishing a routine for reviewing them. So number 1 and number 6 are intertwined because you have to review which KPIs you're using and potentially make adjustments. So within our business, I know that we are not using the same set of metrics today that we were using even 6 months ago. So it's not a matter of getting it 100% correct. It's a matter of being organized, making sure that it makes sense to the appropriate stakeholders, and then trying something. And if you need to course correct, that's fine. None of your KPIs necessarily need to be set in stone, but you do need a roadmap to figure out where you're going and to have a practical set of steps to get there. Again, I have here the established cadence for reviewing them. If we don't make sure that we are reviewing the metrics in a timely manner and holding ourselves accountable, then they become meaningless. It may be great that your team is hitting their number, but if they don't know that, what's the point of having the number to hit in the first place? Similarly, we want to make sure that this is also impacting the business operations of the organization. And by that I mean, I often hear I can set goals for my team, but they don't like to put things into the database. Well, nobody really does. But if they're goaled on it, and if their number is based on them putting in their interviews or their submissions or their placements, I can tell you that as soon as people are held accountable and they are held up in front of their peers as hitting or not hitting their number based on whether or not they've entered that data into the source system, it changes behavior, and it changes real quick. There's nothing worse than being telling your team that you've achieved 100% of your goal, but when the metrics come out for everybody to review, it says that you're only at 75% because you didn't account for those 25 submissions or emails, whatever the main topic is here. Okay. This next set of questions on what you should consider, this is actually the questions that we send out to new clients of InsightSquared. And the reason that we do this is to make sure that we understand what success will look like for them, but also understand their operational readiness. So I'd like to send this set of 7 questions out to different members of the same organization. I used to just do it on a call and we would walk through them, and what I found is that whoever the most senior person on the call was really dictating what was happening and what the responses were. And when I started sending this out as a survey to members of the same organization, I was getting, in some cases, wildly different responses. So that says to me that there's a different perception of how the businesses are being run, and there are just different perspectives. So something as simple as asking in your company, what does a successful recruiter and salesperson look like? How is that measured today? I guarantee that you are going to have some variation in answers there. Number 3 is also super important. I think it's one that's overlooked, having a coaching plan for underperforming reps. Yeah, maybe you sit down and you talk with somebody about their numbers, but what does that conversation look like? Do you have a format for a one-on-one where you have an agenda, where you go over the metrics, where you talk about the outcomes that got you here, and then follow up? If you don't have those 4 elements, then a coaching plan really isn't going to be a useful tool for you or for your reps. It really has to make sense to them, and it also has to have some accountability associated with it. So we typically recommend not only having a coaching plan, but going over the information and being able to access that both as the manager and the direct report in the future, so that if there are questions or if there are milestones that we want to look at, we can look back retrospectively. And then number 5 and 7, the only thing I would want to say there is this is the keep, stop, start part of your organization. You don't have to do everything perfect, and maybe you do some things great and you know there's a couple of areas that you want to work in. Well, you don't have to do everything at once, but do acknowledge what you're doing well. Do be honest about what needs some assistance, and do be honest about the things that you're not doing yet that you really would like to. So our recommendations here for practical next steps, all of the information that we shared today, again, will be dispensed throughout the proper channels, but it's basically about getting organized, figuring out what as a company you want to do in maybe Q4 or 2019. Look back at your historical data to set a blueprint as to how you're going to get there, so it's not just a gut check feeling. It really can be based on numbers that are practical for you and your business. Start to look at what a winning and a losing deal look like and apply those to your open pipeline today. So look critically at the job orders that you have and figure out, is your team wasting time on time wasters? And then the last part is you have to communicate the team. It's great that managers and execs might be organized with data and where they want the company to go to, but if you don't share that out with the company in whatever format is appropriate for you, then your team won't know where they need to go, and they won't be able to help you achieve that. So that is a lot of information that I just went through, and yeah, thank you for listening, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you, Taylor. Now we're going to go ahead and move into the Q&A portion of the webinar. Our first question is, how far back should you look historically at your metrics?
That's a great question. I would say it depends. So there are some companies that have had a well-established process and they've been organized for 5 years, and it's appropriate for them to look at something like conversion ratios and activities or placements, something like that. But if you've changed your process wildly in the past 6 months, or the market has been very unstable in the past 18 months, it depends on which window is going to be appropriate for you. So I would say it depends for each company, but also you might have perm numbers that are different than temp numbers, and you should look back appropriately for those as well.
And what activities should everybody be gold on?
The classic one. As I said at the beginning, if everything's a KPI, then nothing is a KPI. I typically recommend that the activities that lead to a placement are the ones that should be measured. So by default, that's job order creation, internal submission, client submission, interview, placement. Anything above and beyond that is great, but if you have those core metrics, especially placements for both the recruiter and sales side, those are really the bread and butter of what everybody looks at.
And our next question is, should you manage your sales and recruiting teams differently?
I would say absolutely. In general, sales and recruiter folks are just different animals, and they respond differently. And even if you have a full desk operation, I will not believe that you are going to speak to a candidate the exact same way that you're going to speak to a client. Those are different behaviors, and they should be separated out. So for our clients that have separate sales and recruiting function, we typically recommend even having separate dashboards, separate leaderboards, separate set of metrics. And for the teams that are full desk, yep, it makes sense to have those even a little bit discreetly separated into what are the candidate-focused activities versus the client-focused activities.
And how do you ensure that new processes are being followed or adopted by the team?
It's all about accountability. So first and foremost, if you're the executive in your company and you don't make sure that it is known from the top down that this is a process, or this is a new tech stack, or this is a new anything that's going to happen, people aren't going to follow it. Secondly, it has to be publicly known that this is going to be something I'm going to be held accountable for. We changed on our account side at my company that we had to write down MANA, mutually agreed upon next action on every account. And if we don't write down the MANA on the account and on the opportunities, it is well known, the entire company can see, and guess what? Our team started making sure that field was filled out and updated appropriately quite quickly as soon as it was visible to the entire community.
And what factors should determine whether or not you look at an advanced reporting tool?
So this is a good one. I think anyone can benefit from data and from business intelligence. So we work, or I should say, I have worked with companies that are small family-owned businesses with 5 people total, and I've worked with some of our largest clients that have 500 recruiters and salespeople in them. At the core of it, it's always the same problems and challenges that they face. How can I get the most out of my team? How can I get the most out of my pipeline? Using a tool for business intelligence just means that you're using something else to get organized. And some people are able to do that with spreadsheets, and some people are not. The point of our tool is that we've been asking these questions of folks just like yourself for the past 6 or 7 years. And a lot of our reports have been stress tested and are automated. So we not only know which questions to ask, we already have some of the answers for you. And I would say that no matter what size of an organization you are, being organized and having these critical conversations about what is our goals for the year, for the time period? How do we plan to get there? And what does the past data tell us? Regardless of how you get there and whatever tool you use, that is valuable insight that will allow you to optimize your team.
And what are some of the business practices you've seen that lead to success?
Taking a step back, I think, is the big one. When we talked about on the previous slide, what you should consider, these 7 questions, anyone that takes the time to not only consider, are we ready at thinking about data as a sophisticated business, but are we operationally ready? Do people put information in Bullhorn regularly? Do we have regular one-on-one meetings? Am I in a place where I can coach my reps efficiently and effectively because we have a game plan for that? Those are the things that are really some of the best operational practices. And being data-driven and being data organized doesn't happen overnight. It takes organization and it takes some forethought, but there are some ways that you can get there.
Are all metrics created equally? That's individual contributor, manager, exec.
Absolutely not. Even from a manager's perspective, when we build dashboards out for our teams, I will build out a daily dashboard for a manager, a weekly dashboard, and a monthly dashboard. And they may be similar numbers or similar metrics on there, but the perspective is completely different. So I also don't expect that an executive is going to care how many internal submissions were made by an individual contributor that day. The executive should care about the big picture, whereas the individual contributor really does care about that number because, again, that's what his or her revenue or goal is based on. So similar, but not necessarily the exact same.
Awesome. And what are some of the ways you can drill down into your data?
Starting by looking at trends over time, and then when we start to look at different verticals, when we look at things like our time to fill our sales cycle, when we look at do we win deals within a certain value range, do we win deals within a certain industry, are there team members that are better at one aspect than the other? So if your team maybe does perm and temp, maybe you have some superstars that are really good at perm but really terrible at temp, and that's okay. Work with them to play to their strengths and really use some data to back up these decisions.
Okay, everyone, so that's all we've got time for today. There were some great questions asked that we are happy to handle offline, so we'll be sure to follow up on those. Thanks, everyone.